The morning they drove Clara out of Cedar Falls, the sky held that particular shade of gray that promised nothing good. Not rain, not clearing, just the blank, indifferent gray of a world that had stopped caring whether you lived or drowned. Clara had been awake since before dawn, sitting on the edge of her narrow bed in her sister-in-law's house. Former sister-in-law's house, she corrected herself, watching the shadows retreat from the corners of the room. Her hands lay folded in her lap, still and composed, though her heart hammered against her ribs like something caged and wild. Margaret appeared in the doorway without knocking. She never knocked anymore. "The wagon's ready," Margaret said, not quite meeting Clara's eyes. "Thomas says if you're not downstairs in 10 minutes, he'll come up and carry you down himself." Clara nodded once. She'd already packed the night before. One carpet bag with 2 dresses, undergarments, a hairbrush, the small daguerreotype of her late husband Samuel that she'd kept hidden under her pillow. Everything she owned in the world fit into a bag she could carry with one hand. "I'll be down," Clara said quietly. Margaret lingered, her mouth working like she wanted to say something else. For a moment, Clara thought she might apologize, might show some scrap of the warmth that had existed between them once, before Samuel died and left Clara with nothing but debts and Margaret's barely concealed contempt. "You brought this on yourself," Margaret said finally. "Speaking out of turn at church, arguing with Reverend Michaels about the charity fund, making scenes. You've been nothing but trouble since Samuel passed. It's unseemly. A woman should know her place." There it is, Clara thought. Not an apology. Never that. "I'll be down," she repeated, her voice emptier than before. Margaret left. Clara stood, smoothed her black morning dress, worn thin at the elbows now, nearly 3 years old, and picked up her bag. She didn't look back at the room. There was nothing in it worth remembering. The wagon ride to the train station passed in silence. Thomas drove, his jaw set, eyes fixed on the road. Margaret sat beside him, ramrod straight, her face a mask of righteous satisfaction. Clara sat in the back, her bag clutched on her lap, watching Cedar Falls disappear behind them. She'd been born in this town, married in the church on Main Street, buried her husband in the cemetery on the hill, and now she was being expelled like a disease they'd finally worked up the courage to cut out. At the station, Thomas didn't help her down from the wagon. He just jerked his chin toward the platform where a handful of other women waited, all of them wearing that same haunted, desperate expression Clara recognized from her own reflection. "The train will take you west," Thomas said, speaking to her for the first time that morning. "There's a program for mail-order brides, widows, spinsters, women with nowhere else. They'll match you with someone who needs a wife. You'll have a place again." "Or I'll die trying," Clara said softly. Thomas flinched. "Don't be dramatic." "I'm being realistic." She climbed down from the wagon, her legs shaking slightly. "But thank you, Thomas, for the ride." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe, or regret. But it passed quickly. "Goodbye, Clara." "Goodbye." They drove away. Clara stood on the platform with her carpet bag and watched them go. Watched Cedar Falls disappear into that gray morning like a dream half forgotten. She didn't cry. She'd run out of tears somewhere around the 2nd year of widowhood when the creditors had taken Samuel's shop and the town's sympathy had curdled into judgment. Too outspoken, too difficult, too much. That's what they'd called her. And maybe they were right. Maybe she'd been too much for Cedar Falls with its narrow streets and narrower minds. But standing there on that platform, waiting for a train that would carry her toward an unknown future, Clara felt herself growing smaller and smaller, like she might disappear entirely if someone looked away too long. The other women on the platform didn't speak to her. They stood in small clusters, whispering among themselves, casting occasional glances in Clara's direction. She heard fragments of their conversations, stories of dead husbands, lost farms, families that had turned them out. Every one of them carried some variation of the same wound. When the train finally arrived, belching black smoke and screaming metal, Clara climbed aboard with the others and found a seat by a window. The interior smelled of coal dust and unwashed bodies and desperation. She pressed her forehead against the glass and closed her eyes as the train lurched into motion. The journey west took 5 days. 5 days of rattling tracks and fitful sleep and the constant awareness that every mile carried her further from everything she'd known. The other women gradually grew bolder, striking up conversations, sharing food, forming the fragile bonds of shared suffering. Clara mostly listened. There was Martha, a widow from Ohio whose husband had died in a mining accident, leaving her with nothing but debts. There was young Sarah, barely 20, who'd gotten pregnant out of wedlock and been cast out by her father. There was Eleanor, tall and severe, who didn't speak much but whose eyes held storms. "What about you?" Martha asked Clara on the third day, offering her a piece of cornbread wrapped in cloth. "What's your story?" Clara took the bread. "The usual, dead husband, no money, family that decided I was more trouble than I was worth." "Any children?" "No." Something in the way Clara said it made Martha drop the subject. They sat in silence for a while, watching the landscape shift outside the window, from green hills to flat plains to something harder, drier, meaner. The land here didn't forgive mistakes. On the fifth day, the train pulled into Red Hollow. Clara had expected something rough. This was the frontier, after all. But she hadn't expected this. Red Hollow wasn't so much a town as a collection of desperate buildings huddled together against the vastness of the prairie. Wooden structures, hastily built, already weathering badly. Dirt streets churned to mud where horses had passed. And everywhere, that wind, constant, brutal, carrying dust that got into your eyes and mouth and lungs. The women disembarked onto a platform that was barely more than a few planks laid across the mud. A crowd had gathered, men mostly, though Clara spotted a few women lurking at the edges, their faces tight with judgment or curiosity or both. "Line up," called the man who'd been coordinating the program, a officious-looking fellow with thinning hair and a clipboard. "Line up so the gentleman can see you properly." Clara's stomach turned. She'd known what this would be, intellectually, but the reality of standing there while men looked her over like horses at auction made her skin crawl. The women lined up. Clara found herself between Martha and a girl she didn't know, someone who'd gotten on at the last stop. The men began moving down the line. Some of the women were chosen quickly. Young Sarah, despite her pregnancy, found a widower who needed help with his children. A few others paired off with ranchers or shopkeepers, negotiations conducted in low voices, what work was expected, what the arrangement would be. Clara stood very still, her carpetbag at her feet, and waited. The men passed her by. Too old, their eyes said. She was 34, too plain, too used up, too much trouble visible in the set of her jaw, the directness of her gaze. "What about that one?" someone called, pointing at Clara. Laughter rippled through the crowd. "That one?" another man guffawed. "Rather have a pack mule. At least you know what you're getting." More laughter. Clara felt her face burn, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd learned through 3 years of widowhood and small-town cruelty how to hide hurt behind a blank mask. "No takers?" the coordinator asked, consulting his clipboard with a frown. "Mrs. Whitlock, step forward, please." Clara stepped forward. The crowd's laughter grew louder. "Anyone?" the coordinator called. "Mrs. Whitlock is a capable woman, good with household management, excellent cook. She looks half-starved herself," someone muttered. "Bit long in the tooth. Probably barren, too." The words hit like fists. Clara stood there, exposed and humiliated, while these strangers cataloged her flaws for public entertainment. She wanted to run. She wanted to disappear. She wanted... "We want her." The voice was small, but clear. It cut through the laughter like a knife through cloth. Everyone turned. 2 girls stood at the front of the crowd. Identical twins, maybe 7 years old, with dark braids and serious faces. They wore matching calico dresses, patched at the elbows, and their hands were clasped together so tightly their knuckles showed white. "We want her," the girl on the left repeated. "For our mama." The silence that followed was absolute. A man pushed through the crowd. Tall, lean, weather-beaten in the way frontier men got after years of hard sun and harder work. He moved to the girls and put a hand on each of their shoulders. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, gray as winter sky, fixed on Clara with an expression she couldn't parse. "Elias," the coordinator said, clearly startled. "You didn't mention... I didn't know you were looking for..." "I wasn't," the man, Elias, said flatly. His voice matched his face, hard, worn, empty of anything soft. "But my daughters have spoken." He looked down at the twins. Some unspoken communication passed between them, the girls' faces pleading, his locked down tight. "Papa," the girl on the right whispered, Please. Something flickered in Elias's expression, too quick to name. Then he looked back at Clara. Can you work? Clara found her voice. Yes. Cook? Clean? Handle ranch chores? Yes. Care for children? Clara's throat tightened. Yes. Elias studied her for a long moment. The crowd watched, silent now, hungry for drama. Clara met his gaze and didn't look away, even though her heart was hammering so hard she thought everyone must hear it. Fine, Elias said finally. He turned to the coordinator. I'll take her. The coordinator blinked. Are you certain? Because there's paperwork and the arrangement would be... I said I'll take her. Elias's tone brooked no argument. He looked at Clara again. Get your bag. Wagon's down the street. Then he turned and walked away, the twins trailing after him like shadows. The crowd parted to let them through, everyone staring, whispering, already shaping this moment into gossip. Clara stood frozen for 3 full seconds. Then she grabbed her carpet bag and followed. The wagon was exactly what she'd expected, functional, worn, loaded with supplies from town. The twins had already climbed into the back, settling themselves among sacks of flour and coiled rope. Elias stood by the horses, checking the harness with methodical precision. Clara approached slowly. I appreciate... Don't. Elias didn't look up from the harness. Don't thank me. This isn't kindness. I need help. The girls need someone. You need a place. That's the arrangement. I understand. Do you? Now he did look at her, and the directness of it was like being hit with cold water. You'll work. Sun up to sundown. No complaints. The ranch is barely holding together, and I don't have time to coddle someone who can't pull their weight. I can work, Clara said, meeting his eyes. I'm not afraid of hard work. Good. He turned back to the harness. Because you'll get plenty of it. Clara climbed into the back of the wagon with the twins. Up close, they were even more identical than she'd realized. Same dark eyes, same serious expressions, same way of watching the world like they were cataloging everything for later examination. I'm Clara, she said softly. I'm Lily, the girl on the left said. Rose, said the one on the right. Lily and Rose. Those are beautiful names. The girls exchanged a glance, then Lily said, Our real mama picked them, before she died. Something cold settled in Clara's chest. I see. She died last winter, Rose added matter-of-factly. The fever took her, and the baby. Papa buried them both under the big oak tree. Clara's hands tightened on the handle of her carpet bag. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry, Lily said, but it doesn't help. Rose nodded. Papa doesn't talk about her. He doesn't talk much at all anymore. He used to, Lily continued, before. He used to tell us stories and play his fiddle and laugh. But now he just works. From before sun to after dark, Rose said. He works and works and works. But the ranch is still falling apart because there's too much for one person and we're too small to help properly. Lily leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. That's why we asked for you. We need help. Papa needs help, even if he won't say it. Clara looked at these 2 small girls, orphaned, grieving, trying desperately to hold their world together, and felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been frozen since Samuel died, since Cedar Falls turned on her, since she'd stopped believing she mattered to anyone. I'll help, Clara said quietly. I promise. The girls relaxed visibly. Rose even smiled, small and tentative but real. Elias climbed into the driver's seat and snapped the reins. The wagon lurched into motion. Clara gripped the side to steady herself and watched Red Hollow recede behind them. The landscape here was brutal in its emptiness. Flat prairie stretching to the horizon, broken only by occasional scrub brush and the skeleton remains of trees that hadn't survived the drought. The sky pressed down, enormous and indifferent. The wind never stopped. They rode in silence for over an hour. Then the ranch appeared, or what passed for a ranch. A main house, small and weathered. A barn listing slightly to one side, missing boards in several places. Corrals with broken fencing, fields gone to weeds. Everything showing years of neglect compounded by recent grief. It was, Clara realized, exactly what she should have expected. A desperate situation, a last resort, a place for people who'd run out of better options. Welcome home, she thought grimly. Elias stopped the wagon and climbed down without a word. The twins scrambled out and disappeared toward the house. Clara sat in the back of the wagon, her carpet bag clutched in her lap, and tried to gather her courage. You coming? Elias called. Clara climbed down. Her legs were stiff from the ride, her dress dusty from the road. She followed Elias toward the house, taking in the details: the sagging porch, the broken shutter hanging by one hinge, the door that didn't quite close properly. Inside was worse. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space altogether. Dishes were piled in the basin. Dust coated every surface. The stove looked like it hadn't been properly cleaned in months. Children's clothes lay scattered across chairs. The whole place had the feel of somewhere people slept but didn't live. A shelter, not a home. Girls sleep upstairs, Elias said, gesturing to a ladder leading to a loft. There's a spare room off the kitchen. Small, but it's yours. Wash basins out back. Privies past the barn. We rise at dawn. Breakfast is simple, whatever you can manage with what's in the pantry. Questions? Claire had 1,000 questions. Where was the nearest town for supplies? What were the girls' routines? What exactly did he expect from her beyond cooking and cleaning? But looking at Elias's face, closed off, exhausted, barely holding together, she asked none of them. No questions, she said. Good. I've got cattle to check, fence down in the south pasture. I'll be back after dark. He headed for the door, then paused. Girls are good children. They've been through enough. Don't make things harder for them. I won't. He left. Clara heard his boots on the porch, then the sound of him walking toward the barn. She stood in the middle of the chaotic kitchen and took a slow breath. The twins appeared from wherever they'd vanished to. They stood in the doorway, watching Clara with those serious, measuring eyes. So, Clara said, should we start by cleaning this kitchen? Lily and Rose exchanged another of their wordless twin communications. Then, simultaneously, they both smiled. Yes, Rose said. Please, Lily added. They worked until the light failed. Clara found soap and rags and set the twins to clearing the table while she tackled the mountain of dishes. The water she heated on the stove turned gray with grease and grime. She scrubbed until her hands were raw, then scrubbed some more. The girls worked silently, efficiently, in that synchronized way twins sometimes had. They knew where everything went without asking. They moved around each other like dancers who'd practiced the same routine 1,000 times. As the kitchen began to emerge from under the chaos, Clara felt something loosen in her chest. This was familiar territory. Dirty dishes, grimy floors, disorder waiting to be shaped into order. These were problems with solutions, clear, concrete, manageable. Not like the other problems. Not like grief or loneliness, or the way a whole town could turn on you because you refused to be quiet when you saw something wrong. When full darkness fell, Clara lit the lamps and assessed what they had accomplished. The kitchen wasn't perfect. It would take days to properly clean years of neglect. But it was better, functional. The dishes were clean and put away, the table was cleared, the floor was swept. Are you hungry? Claire asked the twins. They nodded. What do you usually eat? Whatever we can find, Lily said. Bread mostly. Sometimes Papa makes beans. Clara checked the pantry. Sparse. Flour, cornmeal, a few cans of beans, some potatoes gone soft, dried meat that might have been venison once. Not much, but enough. She made Johnny cakes and fried up the meat with the least bad potatoes. Simple food, frontier food, but hot and filling. The twins ate like they were starving, which they probably were. Clara ate mechanically, her mind already racing ahead to tomorrow's work. What needed to be done, what order to tackle it in, how to manage this overwhelming disaster of a household. Elias came in just as they were finishing. He looked at the clean kitchen, the remnants of dinner, the twins sitting at the table with clean faces and brushed hair. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or the ghost of some remembered emotion. Then it vanished behind his usual mask. There's a plate for you, Clara said, gesturing to the stove. If you want it. Elias ate standing up, his back to them, looking out the window at the darkness. When he finished, he rinsed his plate in the basin, the only clean dish in this house that anyone bothered to clean, Clara noticed, and set it to dry. Girls, bed. Lily and Rose stood immediately. They walked to Clara, and in perfect synchronization, each gave her a brief, fierce hug. "Thank you," Rose whispered. "For making things nice," Lily added. Then they climbed the ladder to the loft, moving like shadows. Clara and Elias were alone. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Finally, Clara spoke. "I'll need to know what supplies you can get, and when, so I can plan meals." "There's a list. I'll leave it for you." "The fence in the south pasture. I'll handle the ranch work. You handle the house. That's the arrangement." Another silence. "Your daughters are good children," Clara said quietly. Elias's shoulders tightened. "I know. They're grieving. I know that too. I know what they need." His voice was sharp now, edged with something raw. "I know they need more than I can give them right now. That's why you're here. That's the arrangement. So please, Mrs. Whitlock, just do what you came to do and leave the rest alone." He walked out without another word. Clara heard his boots on the porch, then silence. She stood in the clean kitchen, cleaner than it had been, at least, and felt the full weight of her situation settle over her shoulders. She was in a stranger's house, in a town that had publicly mocked her, caring for motherless children and working for a man who'd made it clear he saw her as nothing more than hired help. But she had a roof over her head, food in her belly, a purpose. It would have to be enough. Clara found the spare room off the kitchen. It was exactly as Elias had described. Small, barely big enough for the narrow bed and tiny chest of drawers. But it was clean, and the bed had sheets, and when she closed the door, she had privacy. She unpacked her carpet bag. 2 dresses hung on the wall pegs. Undergarments went in the drawer. The hairbrush sat on top of the chest. And the daguerreotype of Samuel, young, smiling, eternally preserved in that moment before the illness took him, she propped against the wall where she could see it when she lay down. "Well, Samuel," she whispered to the image, "I've made quite a mess of things, haven't I? You'd probably be ashamed. Your proper wife, reduced to mail-order bride, for a man who doesn't want her and children who need her out of desperation. Not exactly the life we planned." The Samuel in the picture just smiled that frozen smile, offering no answers, no comfort, just the reminder of what she'd lost. Clara lay down on the narrow bed, still fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling. Outside, the prairie wind howled around the corners of the house. Somewhere, cattle were lowing. The whole world felt enormous and empty and hostile. But in the loft above, 2 small girls were sleeping. And in the barn or the fields or wherever he'd gone, a man was probably still working himself to death trying to hold together a ranch, and a life that was crumbling around him. And in this small room, Clara was making a silent promise to herself. She would not fail these people. She would not become another thing they lost. She would make herself necessary, irreplaceable, strong enough to matter. Because if she couldn't do that, if she couldn't prove her worth here, in this last chance place, then Cedar Falls had been right about her all along. And that was something she absolutely could not accept. Clara closed her eyes. Tomorrow would come early, bringing with it all the brutal demands of frontier life. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, she had a purpose beyond simply surviving. It would have to be enough. It would have to be. Clara woke to darkness and the sound of boots on the porch. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that meant Elias was already up and moving. She lay still for a moment, disoriented, before remembering where she was. The narrow bed, the small room, the ranch at the edge of nowhere. She dressed quickly in the pre-dawn cold, her fingers clumsy with the buttons. Through the thin wall, she could hear the twins stirring in the loft above, their movements creating small creaks in the floorboards. The house was coming alive around her, reluctant and slow. When Clara emerged from her room, Elias was at the stove, attempting to coax fire from damp kindling. He looked up briefly, his face shadowed in the lamplight, then returned his attention to the stove without greeting. "I can do that," Clara said. "I've got it." "I'm sure you do. But it's my job now, isn't it?" Elias straightened, regarding her with that flat, measuring look she was already learning to recognize. Then he stepped aside without a word and headed for the door. "What time do you want breakfast?" Clara called after him. "Whenever it's ready." The door closed behind him with a decisive thud. Clara went to work on the fire, her movements automatic from years of managing her own household. The kindling was indeed damp, likely stored wrong, or not stored at all, but she coaxed it to catch with patience and careful arrangement of the dryer pieces. Within minutes, she had a proper flame going. The twins descended the ladder with the quiet efficiency of children who'd learned not to make unnecessary noise. They were already dressed, their braids somewhat crooked but serviceable. "Morning," Rose said softly. "Good morning." Clara assessed the pantry again in the growing light. Still sparse, but she could work with it. "How do you two feel about cornmeal mush?" "We feel hungry," Lily said, so seriously that Clara almost smiled. She set them to fetching water while she mixed the mush, adding a precious spoonful of molasses she'd found hiding behind the flour sack. When Elias returned 20 minutes later, smelling of horses and hay and that particular scent of hard work already begun, she had hot food on the table and coffee boiling. He ate without comment, standing again, his eyes distant. The twins ate quietly, occasionally glancing at their father, then at Clara, as if measuring the space between them. "The fence in the south pasture," Elias said abruptly, addressing the air more than Clara. "I'll be working on it today. Won't be back until dark." "What about supplies?" Clara asked. "Your list. You mentioned a list." He pulled a crumpled paper from his pocket and tossed it on the table. "That's what we can afford this month. Maybe. Depends on whether Morrison gives me credit." Clara unfolded the paper. The list was short and written in a cramped, angular hand: flour, sugar, salt, lard, coffee. The basics. Barely enough to sustain 3 people, let alone 4. "When do you go to town?" "Saturday, 3 days. I'll need to come with you to see what's available, what the prices are, how to make things stretch." Elias's jaw tightened. "Fine, but we're not staying long. I don't have time for socializing." "Neither do I," Clara said quietly. Something flickered in his expression, surprise maybe, or the beginning of curiosity, but it vanished as quickly as it came. He finished his coffee, rinsed his cup in the basin, and left without another word. The twins watched him go, their small faces unreadable. "He doesn't mean to be rude," Rose said after a moment, as if apologizing for him. "He's just sad," Lily added. "All the time sad. Even when he doesn't look it." Clara sat down at the table with them. "Tell me about your mother, if you want to." The girls exchanged one of their silent twin communications. Then Rose spoke, her voice careful. "She was nice. She laughed a lot. She used to sing while she worked." "She made Papa laugh too," Lily continued. "They would dance sometimes, in the kitchen, when they thought we were asleep. But we'd sneak down and watch from the stairs. She taught us to read," Rose said, "and to sew. And she was going to teach us to cook, but then the baby came too early," Lily finished, "and the fever started, and Papa sent us to stay with Mrs. Henderson in town for 3 days. When we came back, Mama was gone." Rose's voice went flat. "And the baby too. Papa had already buried them. He wouldn't let us see. He said we should remember them alive." Claire's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." "Everyone says that," Lily said, echoing her words from the wagon. "But sorry doesn't bring her back." "No," Clara agreed. "It doesn't. Nothing brings people back once they're gone. You just have to learn to live in the world without them." Rose looked at her sharply. "You sound like you know." "I do. My husband died 3 years ago. Illness. Quick, but not quick enough, if you understand. And afterward, I was alone. The world kept moving, and I had to figure out how to move with it." The twins absorbed this in silence. Then Lily said, "Did people say sorry to you too?" "At first. Then they stopped being sorry and started being annoyed that I hadn't disappeared or remarried or done whatever it is widows are supposed to do to stop being inconvenient." Rose nodded slowly. "People get tired of sad." "They do," Clara confirmed. "So you learn to keep it to yourself. To be sad quietly, where it doesn't bother anyone." "Is that what Papa's doing?" Lily asked. "Being sad quietly?" Clara looked at the door Elias had disappeared through. "I think your Papa's doing the best he can, which is all any of us can do." The girls seemed satisfied with this answer. They helped Clara clear the breakfast dishes. Then Rose asked, "What should we do today?" Clara surveyed the house in the full morning light. It was even worse than she'd thought. Dust everywhere, cobwebs in the corners, the windows so dirty they barely let in light. The floor needed scrubbing. The stove needed a proper cleaning. The whole place needed attention it hadn't received in months. "We're going to clean," Clara said. "Everything, top to bottom. It'll take days, but we're going to make this house livable again." "Mama used to say a clean house was a happy house," Rose said quietly. Your mama was right. They worked through the morning and into the afternoon. Clara tackled the windows while the twins swept and dusted under her direction. The amount of dirt they removed was staggering, evidence of how completely Elias had let the household go in his grief. He'd been surviving, not living, keeping body and soul together for himself and his daughters, but letting everything else slide into neglect. By midday, Clara's back ached and her hands were raw from scrubbing. The twins were flagging too, their movements slower, less enthusiastic. Clara called a break and made a simple lunch from the dwindling supplies, bread and the last of the dried meat, water from the well. They ate on the porch, in the thin autumn sunshine. The prairie stretched out before them, vast and empty. Clara could see why someone might choose this land, the space of it, the freedom. But she could also see why it might drive a person mad. All that emptiness, pressing in from every direction, nowhere to hide from your own thoughts. "Do you like it here?" Rose asked suddenly. Clara considered the question. "I don't know yet. Ask me in a month." "Mama loved it," Lily said. "She said it was hard, but beautiful, like things worth having usually are." She sounds like she was wise. She was, both twins said together. They returned to work. Clara found a rhythm in it. The repetitive motions, the visible progress, the way dirt and disorder gave way to something cleaner, more ordered. This was what she was good at, what she'd always been good at, taking chaos and shaping it into something manageable. If only human relationships were as straightforward as dirty windows. As the afternoon wore on, Clara began exploring the parts of the house she hadn't yet cleaned. The twins' loft was sparse but tidy. They clearly took care of their own space. Elias's room, which she'd been avoiding, was behind a closed door off the main room. She knocked, though she knew he wasn't there. No answer. She opened the door. The room was Spartan. A bed, neatly made, a chest of drawers, a single chair. No decoration, no personal items visible. It could have been anyone's room or no one's. The only sign that a human being actually lived here was the shirt draped over the chair and the boots lined up precisely by the door. Clara started to back out. This felt like an intrusion, but then she noticed the dust on every surface. Thick dust, months of accumulation. Whatever cleaning Elias did for himself, it clearly didn't extend to his own room. She cleaned it, quickly, efficiently, trying not to look too closely at the personal details. But she couldn't help noticing certain things. The wedding ring that sat on the chest of drawers, too small to be his. The woman's shawl hanging on a peg, carefully preserved. The way one side of the bed had covers that looked slept in, while the other side remained pristine and undisturbed. He was still sleeping on half the bed, still leaving space for someone who would never return. Clara's chest ached. She finished cleaning and retreated, closing the door softly behind her. By the time darkness fell, they'd made real progress. The main room was transformed. Clean windows, swept floor, surfaces cleared of dust and grime. The kitchen gleamed. The air smelled less of abandonment and more like lye soap and determination. Clara made dinner from what little remained. Beans flavored with a bit of the dried meat, cornbread, water. Simple food, but hot. The twins set the table without being asked, moving around each other in their synchronized way. Elias came in after full dark, covered in dirt and clearly exhausted. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the transformed room. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. A tiny relaxation, there and gone. "You've been busy," he said. "That's what you're paying me for, in room and board, at least." "I didn't ask you to clean my room." "The dust asked me." It was very insistent. The corners of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but closer than she'd seen. "That's so." "Very demanding, Dust. Won't take no for an answer." This time, he definitely almost smiled. The twins watched this exchange with wide eyes, as if witnessing something rare and precious. "There's dinner," Clara said, "if you want it." Elias washed at the basin, then sat at the table. Actually sat, instead of eating standing up. The twins scrambled into their chairs, their faces bright with something that might have been hope. They ate in silence, but it was a different quality of silence than the night before. Less hostile. More like people who were learning to exist in the same space without constantly bracing for conflict. "The fence is repaired," Elias said eventually. "South pasture's secure. Tomorrow I need to check the well pump and fix the barn door. It's hanging wrong, scraping every time it opens. The twins and I will finish the house cleaning, Clara said. Then I need to assess what supplies we actually have versus what we need. Your list is optimistic, but I can probably stretch things if I'm careful. Elias nodded. Morrison at the general store. He's fair enough. Tell him I sent you, he'll give you honest prices. Will he give you credit? Sometimes. Depends on his mood and whether his wife's been nagging him about unpaid accounts. And if he won't? Elias's face hardened. Then we make do with less. Same as always. Clara wanted to ask more about the ranch's finances, about how close to the edge they really were, but his expression warned her off. This was not a man who welcomed questions about his struggles. After dinner, Elias surprised them all by pulling out a worn deck of cards. You know Rummy? He asked the twins, their faces lit up. Mama taught us. Then let's play. If Mrs. Whitlock doesn't mind learning. I know Rummy, Clara said. My husband and I used to play. Though I should warn you, I'm competitive. So am I, Elias said, and dealt the cards. They played 3 hands. The twins won 1 each, laughing when they laid down their sets. Elias won the 3rd, his strategy more methodical than inspired. Clara came close each time, but never quite managed to win. You were holding back, Elias said when they finished gathering the cards. Maybe I just wanted to see how everyone else played. Or maybe you didn't want to embarrass us on your second night. That too. He looked at her fully then, really looked at her, for maybe the first time since she'd arrived. His eyes were gray and weary and guarded, but something in them was less hostile than before. Thank you, he said quietly. For the cleaning and the food and this. He gestured vaguely at the room, the table, the sense of normalcy they'd managed to create for half an hour. You're welcome. The twins went to bed without protest. Clara cleaned up while Elias sat at the table, going over what looked like account books by lamplight. She could see him frowning at the numbers, his jaw tight. How bad is it? She asked, then immediately regretted the question. Not her business, not her place. But Elias didn't snap at her. He just rubbed his eyes and said, Bad enough. The cattle aren't bringing what they should. Feed costs more every year. The ranch was barely profitable when my wife was alive and we were both working it. Now, he trailed off. Now I'm one disaster away from losing everything. Clara dried her hands on a towel. What would count as a disaster? Disease in the herd. Another hard winter. The bank deciding they've waited long enough for payment. Take your pick. So we don't let any of those things happen. He looked up at her, something like amusement crossing his face. Just like that? Just like that. I can't control the bank or the weather, but I can control this household. I can make supplies stretch. I can preserve what needs preserving. I can find ways to save money you're currently spending on things we don't need. I can... She paused, choosing her words carefully. I can take this one burden off your shoulders at least, so you can focus on the ranch. Elias studied her for a long moment. Why? Why what? Why would you do that? You're here out of necessity, same as me. You could just go through the motions, do the minimum. Why actually care? Clara thought about Cedar Falls, about being thrown out, about standing on that platform while men evaluated her worth and found it wanting, about the twins stepping forward when no one else would. Because I don't know how to do anything halfway, she said finally. And because your daughters deserve better than going through the motions. They deserve a household that functions. A home, not just a place to sleep. They chose you, Elias said softly. I still don't understand why, but they chose you. They haven't shown interest in anything since their mother died, but they saw you and decided you were what we needed. Children see clearly sometimes, before the world teaches them to second-guess their instincts. Elias closed his account book. I should tell you, the town won't make this easy. They'll talk about you being here, about the arrangement. Some of them were already spreading gossip before we even left yesterday. I'm familiar with gossip. I survived 3 years as a difficult widow in a small town. I can handle whatever Red Hollow wants to throw at me. Even if they call you a whore? Even if they imply you're here for reasons that have nothing to do with housekeeping? Clara's hands tightened on the towel. Is that what they're saying? Some of them, Morrison's wife particularly,
She's got a mouth on her and no shortage of opinions about proper behavior. Then Mrs. Morrison and I will simply have to agree to disagree about what constitutes proper behavior. Elias almost smiled again. You're tougher than you look.
I've had to be. The world doesn't have much patience for women who aren't tough. He stood, stretching his back with a grimace. I'll be up before dawn. Cattle need checking, and I want to get to that barn door early. I'll have breakfast ready. He paused at his bedroom door. Clara. It was the first time he'd used her given name. It sounded strange in his voice, careful, like he wasn't sure if he had permission. Yes? You were right about the dust. It was very insistent. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Clara finished cleaning up, banked the fire for the night, and retreated to her small room. She sat on the bed and looked at Samuel's daguerreotype in the lamplight. Well, she whispered to the image, it's not what we planned, but it's something. And it's better than being alone in Cedar Falls, waiting for Margaret's charity to run out entirely. Samuel's frozen smile offered no judgment, no advice, just that permanent record of who he'd been before illness and death had claimed him. Clara blew out the lamp and lay down in the darkness. Outside, the prairie wind howled its eternal song. The house creaked and settled. Somewhere in the loft, one of the twins was dreaming. She could hear the small, restless sounds of sleep. She'd been here 2 days. It felt like longer. Like she'd already carved out a small space in this household, made herself a piece of its functioning. But she knew better than to get comfortable. Nothing was permanent. Nothing was promised. She was here on sufferance because 2 small girls had chosen her, and their father hadn't had the heart to refuse them. That could change. Would change, probably, once Elias found someone better. Someone younger, prettier, more suitable. Someone the town wouldn't gossip about. But until then, Clara would work. She would make herself indispensable. She would prove that she deserved the space she occupied, that she earned her keep and then some. And maybe, just maybe, she would find a way to build something here that resembled a life. The next morning came too soon and too dark. Clara was up before Elias this time, the fire already going when he emerged from his room. He stopped, surprised, then nodded approval. Coffee? Clara offered. Please. They shared the quiet of pre-dawn, both of them moving around the kitchen with the careful courtesy of people learning each other's patterns. Elias drank his coffee strong and black. Clara preferred hers with a bit of milk when they had it, which they didn't. The twins came down as the sun was rising. They looked less exhausted than they had the previous morning, their movements less heavy. Small improvements, but Clara had learned to notice them. Today we finished the house, Clara announced over breakfast. Then tomorrow we start on the real work, preserving what we can, planning meals, figuring out how to make those pitiful supplies last. What about our lessons? Lily asked. Mama was teaching us arithmetic and reading. Clara looked at Elias. Do you want me to continue their education? He hesitated. Can you? I can teach basic arithmetic, reading, writing. I'm not a formal teacher, but I had decent schooling myself. Then, yes, if you have time. I'll make time. Education matters. Rose brightened. Mama said that too. She said learning was the one thing no one could take away from you. Your mother was right about a lot of things, it seems. After breakfast, Elias disappeared to his ranch work. Clara and the twins tackled the remaining areas of the house. The loft, which needed only light cleaning since the girls maintained it themselves, and the various storage areas that had become dumping grounds for things no one knew what to do with. They found treasures hidden in the chaos. A box of books, including some primers the twins could use for lessons. A set of good dishes wrapped in cloth and forgotten. Fabric scraps that could be turned into quilts or clothing. Seeds for a garden, if it wasn't too late in the season to plant. Mama was saving those seeds for spring, Rose said, holding the packets carefully. She wanted to expand the garden. Then we'll plant them in her honor, Clara said. Some things we can still get in the ground. Root vegetables, maybe. Hardy greens, it'll be tight, but possible. Really? Lily's face lit up. We could have fresh vegetables? If we work fast and the weather holds, it's late, but not impossible. The twins threw themselves into the project with sudden enthusiasm. They hauled everything out to the yard, sorted through it under Clara's direction, discarded what was truly useless, and organized the rest. By afternoon, the storage areas were clear, and the yard was full of sorted piles. Elias came back early, saw the chaos in the yard, and stopped short. "What happened here?" "We're organizing," Clara said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Tomorrow I'll put it all back properly, but I needed to see what we actually have before I could plan anything." He walked through the piles, taking inventory. "Where did all this come from?" "The storage areas. You've been shoving things in there and forgetting about them." Some of this was Rachel's. His voice went flat on his wife's name. "Her things. I know. We were careful. Everything of hers is in that pile there." Clara pointed to a carefully separated collection. Clothes, personal items, the things that were too intimate to discard or absorb into general household goods. "I figured you'd want to decide what to do with them." Elias knelt beside the pile, his hands hovering over a shawl, the same one Clara had seen hanging in his room. After a moment, he picked it up and pressed it to his face, breathing in whatever scent remained. The twins watched their father, their faces solemn. "Papa?" Rose said softly. Elias lowered the shawl. His eyes were dry but red-rimmed. "I'm all right, just remembering." "We remember too," Lily said. "Every day." He pulled both girls into a hug, sudden and fierce. They clung to him, this small family holding each other together. Clara turned away, giving them privacy, and busied herself reorganizing a nearby pile that didn't need reorganizing. When she looked back, Elias was standing. The shawl was folded over his arm. "Keep the rest for whatever you need," he said to Clara. "The fabric, the household things, but this," he held up the shawl, "this I'm keeping." "Of course." He carried it inside. The twins stayed in the yard with Clara, helping her finish the sorting. Neither of them mentioned what had just happened, but something had shifted. Some small movement toward healing, maybe, or at least toward acknowledging the wound. That evening, they had leftovers for dinner, the last of what Clara could cobble together from the dwindling supplies. Tomorrow, they'd be down to basics until Saturday's trip to town. "I've been thinking about the garden," Clara said during the meal. "If we move fast, we can get some cold weather crops in, root vegetables, greens. It won't be much, but it'll help supplement our stores through winter." "The garden plot's overgrown," Elias said. "Haven't touched it since, in months. The twins and I can clear it, if you can spare a few hours to help turn the soil." He considered this. "Saturday morning, before we go to town, I'll turn it, you can plant." "Deal." Rose and Lily exchanged excited glances. Small things, Clara was learning, meant everything to children who'd lost so much. The promise of fresh vegetables, the possibility of honoring their mother's plans. These were victories worth celebrating. After dinner, Clara pulled out the primers they'd found and assessed the twins' reading levels. Both were competent for their age. Their mother had clearly been thorough in her teaching, but they were rusty from months of neglect. "We'll do lessons every afternoon," Clara said. "After lunch, before evening chores, reading, writing, arithmetic, and whatever else seems useful." "Can you teach us cooking?" Lily asked. "Mama was going to, but then she got sick," Rose finished quietly, "and she never got to." "I can teach you cooking and sewing and household management, all the things you'll need to know." "To be good wives someday?" Rose asked, her tone skeptical. "To be capable human beings who can take care of themselves and anyone else who needs it, wife or not. Those skills matter regardless of what your life ends up looking like." Elias, who'd been listening from his chair by the fire, glanced up at this. "That's not how most people would put it. Most people haven't been a widow trying to survive on her own. I learned fast that capability matters more than propriety." "Propriety is what keeps society functioning," Elias countered, but his tone was more curious than argumentative. "Propriety is what lets society judge people instead of helping them. I've had enough of propriety to last a lifetime." "Is that why your family threw you out?" The question was blunt, almost rude, but Clara found she didn't mind. At least it was honest. "Part of it. I spoke up when I shouldn't have, questioned when I should have been quiet, refused to be grateful for charity that came with conditions. Eventually I became more trouble than I was worth." She looked at him directly. "Sound familiar?" His mouth twitched. "Might do?" The twins watched this exchange with fascination, their heads turning back and forth like they were following a tennis match. "Are you two arguing?" Lily asked. "No," Clara and Elias said simultaneously. "It sounds like arguing." "It's discussing," Clara corrected. Arguing is when people yell and get mean. This is just two people talking honestly. Mama and Papa used to discuss too, Rose said. We liked it. It meant they weren't pretending. Elias looked at his daughter, something painful crossing his face. Then he stood abruptly. I've got to check the horses. Don't wait up. He left. The twins sighed in unison. Did we say something wrong? Lily asked. No, sweetheart. You just reminded him of your mother. Sometimes memories hurt before they heal. How long does the hurting part last? Clara thought about Samuel, about the ache that had dulled from sharp to bearable but never entirely disappeared. I don't know. Probably different for everyone, but it does get easier. Not better exactly, just easier to carry. The girls seemed to accept this. They helped Clara clean up, then climbed to their loft for bed. Clara sat alone in the clean kitchen, listening to the house settle around her. Elias didn't come back for over an hour. When he finally did, his hair was windblown and his eyes distant. Horses are fine, he said to no one in particular. I didn't think they weren't. He poured himself water from the pitcher, drank it standing at the sink. My daughters talk about their mother around you. Should they not? They haven't. Not in months. Not to me, anyway. I thought maybe they'd forgotten, or moved on, or... He stopped. I don't know what I thought. Children don't forget their mothers, but they learn fast which topics are safe and which ones cause pain. If they weren't talking about her, it's because they thought it hurt you too much to hear. It does hurt. I know. But that doesn't mean they should pretend she never existed. Elias set down his cup with careful precision. You're very direct. Life's too short for dancing around truth. We both know that better than most. He almost smiled. Fair enough. He paused, then asked, What was your husband like? The question surprised her. Kind, gentle, a bit impractical. He was a clockmaker. Could fix anything mechanical, but couldn't balance an account book to save his life. He got sick fast, died faster. Sometimes I'm grateful it wasn't drawn out. Other times I resent not having more time to prepare, to say proper goodbyes. Rachel lingered for 3 days. I watched her slip away, hour by hour, and couldn't do anything to stop it. The baby came too early, too small. Didn't even cry, just wasn't viable. The midwife said sometimes it happens that way. His voice was flat, emotionless, but his hands gripped the counter until his knuckles went white. I buried them together. Couldn't stand to separate them. Claire said nothing. There were no words adequate for that kind of loss. The girls ask me about her sometimes, Elias continued, and I don't know what to say. How do you explain to children that their mother was everything and now she's gone and the world just keeps turning like it doesn't matter? You tell them the truth, that she mattered, that she still matters, that missing her doesn't mean forgetting how to live. He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his expression cracked open just slightly. Is that what you tell yourself? Every day. They stood there in the kitchen, two people who'd been broken by grief and were trying to figure out how to function around the damage. Outside, the prairie wind howled. Inside, the house held steady. Saturday, Elias said finally. Garden first, then town. We'll make it work. We will, Clara agreed. He went to his room. Clara went to hers. The house fell silent, but something had shifted. Some small foundation had been laid. Clara could feel it, fragile, uncertain, but real. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Saturday morning arrived with a sky the color of old bruises. Clara woke to that particular quality of light that meant weather was coming. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. The air felt heavy, expectant, like the world was holding its breath. Elias was already outside when she emerged from her room, his silhouette dark against the gray dawn as he worked the garden plot with a spade. The twins were still sleeping, their breathing soft and even from the loft above. Clara made coffee and took a cup out to him. He straightened when he saw her coming, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool morning air. Thought you could use this, she said, handing him the cup. He took it, nodding thanks. Ground's harder than I expected. Haven't turned this soil in over a year. The twins are excited about it, about planting something their mother wanted. Elias drank his coffee, his eyes on the half-turned earth. Rachel spent hours planning this garden, drew diagrams, calculated yields, figured out what would grow best in this soil. She was good at that, seeing potential in things. Sounds like she was good at a lot of things. She was. He handed back the empty cup. I'll have this ready in an hour. Then we plant fast and head to town. Clara went back inside to wake the twins and prepare breakfast. By the time they'd eaten and cleaned up, Elias had the garden plot turned and ready. The soil was dark and rich where his spade had broken through the crusted surface. They planted quickly, Clara directing while the twins followed her instructions with focused determination. Root vegetables went in first: turnips, beets, carrots, then the hardy greens that might survive an early frost. It was late in the season, almost too late, but Clara had learned that trying was better than giving up before you started. Will they really grow? Rose asked, patting dirt around a seedling with careful hands. If we're lucky and the weather holds, but even if we only get half a crop, that's half more than we'd have otherwise. Lily looked up at the bruised sky. It looks like rain. Rain would be good. These seeds need water to germinate. Mama used to say rain was a blessing, Rose said quietly, even when it made everything muddy. Your mother was right. Clara stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. All right, that's done. Let's get cleaned up for town. The ride into Red Hollow took 40 minutes. Elias drove in silence, his jaw set, clearly not looking forward to whatever awaited them. The twins sat in the back with Clara, pointing out landmarks along the way. A twisted tree where they'd once seen a coyote, a creek bed that only ran during spring melt, the place where their mother's wagon had gotten stuck in mud 2 winters ago. Red Hollow looked no more welcoming than it had the day Clara arrived. If anything, it looked more hostile. Several people were on the main street when they rolled in, and Clara felt their eyes tracking the wagon like predators watching prey. Elias pulled up in front of Morrison's general store. Stay close, he said to the twins. Then, to Clara, and don't let Morrison's wife bait you. She'll try. I can handle Mrs. Morrison. That's what worries me. Inside the store, the air smelled of coffee, dried goods, and judgment. Morrison himself was behind the counter, a portly man with shrewd eyes and a careful smile. His wife stood nearby, arranging canned goods with the precise movements of someone who needed to control her environment. Elias, Morrison said, nodding. And the new Mrs. Boone, I presume. I'm not, Clara started, but Elias cut her off. Miss Whitlock is helping with the household, that's all. Of course. Morrison's smile didn't waver, but his wife's mouth tightened. What can I do for you today? Elias pulled out his list. What I can afford of this, and I'll need credit for the rest until I can sell some cattle. Morrison examined the list, his face thoughtful. Mrs. Morrison, however, spoke up immediately. Credit? Henry, you know we can't keep extending credit to everyone who asks. We're running a business, not a charity. Martha, Morrison said quietly, a warning in his tone. I'm just saying what needs saying. Mr. Boone already owes us from last month and the month before. At some point, I'll pay what I owe, Elias said, his voice tight. I always have. Eventually. But meanwhile, Martha, that's enough. Morrison's voice was firmer now. He turned to Elias. Don't mind her. We can work something out. But the damage was done. Clara could see it in the set of Elias's shoulders, the way his hands clenched at his sides. The twins had gone very still, very quiet, the way children did when they sensed adult tension. How much do I owe total? Elias asked. Morrison consulted a ledger. $47, not counting today. And if I can only pay $20 today, then you still owe $27, plus whatever today adds. Mrs. Morrison made a small sound of disapproval. Clara felt her temper rising, that particular sensation of heat behind her breastbone that always preceded her saying things she probably shouldn't. Perhaps, Clara said, her voice carefully pleasant, we could discuss what's actually necessary versus what's merely convenient. I'm quite good at stretching supplies. Mrs. Morrison turned her attention to Clara, her eyes sharp and assessing. I'm sure you are. Women in your position have to be resourceful. The emphasis on position made the insult clear. Clara smiled, showing teeth. Indeed, resourcefulness is a valuable skill, though I suppose not everyone needs to develop it if they're fortunate enough to have never known hardship. Mrs. Morrison's face flushed. I beg your pardon? Nothing to pardon. I was agreeing with you. Morrison cleared his throat loudly. Why don't I show you what we have in stock, Miss Whitlock? and you can decide what's most important. He led Clara through the store, pointing out prices and quantities. She made mental calculations, weighing nutrition against cost, shelf life against immediate need. Behind them, she could hear Mrs. Morrison speaking in a low, urgent voice to her husband, and Elias responding in monosyllables. "Don't mind Martha," Morrison said quietly when they were out of earshot. "She's protective of the business." "She's rude," Clara corrected. "But I've dealt with worse." "I'm sure you have." Morrison pulled down a sack of flour. "For what it's worth, I think what you're doing is decent. Those girls needed someone, and Elias was drowning trying to do it all himself. You're one of the few who sees it that way, I imagine. Small towns are hard on people who don't fit the expected pattern, but they come around eventually, or they don't, and you learn not to care." Clara assembled her supplies: flour, salt, lard, coffee, a little sugar, dried beans. Bare minimum, but she could work with it. Morrison wrote everything down, calculated the total. "That's $11.30, he said. "But I'll call it 11 even. That's generous. Consider it an investment in those girls having a proper meal." They returned to the counter where Elias waited with the twins. He looked at the assembled supplies, then at the figure Morrison had written. 11, and I owe you 20 from today's budget. That's 31 total. "I can stretch what we have," Clara interjected. "Another month at least, maybe more." Elias pulled out a worn leather wallet and counted bills. $23. He stared at the money for a long moment, and Clara could see him calculating what that money represented, what he'd have to sacrifice, how long it would take to earn more. "I'll pay you 15 today," Elias said finally. "The rest when I sell cattle. 3 weeks, maybe 4. Morrison nodded. "That's fine, Elias. I trust you're good for it." "He'll be good for it when we see the money," Mrs. Morrison said sharply from behind her arranged cans. "Trust doesn't pay our bills either." "Martha, I said that's enough." Morrison's patience was clearly wearing thin. He took Elias's money and made change. "Don't worry about Martha. She's been in a mood all week." "A mood?" Mrs. Morrison repeated, her voice rising. "I'm being practical, Henry, unlike you who gives credit to anyone with a sad story. That's my decision to make, not yours. It affects both of us when—" A crash from outside cut off whatever Mrs. Morrison had been about to say. Everyone turned toward the sound. Through the window, Clara could see a crowd gathering in the street, people pointing and shouting. Elias was out the door before anyone else moved. Clara grabbed the twins' hands and followed, Morrison right behind them. In the street, 2 men were fighting, wrestling in the mud, throwing wild punches. One of them Clara recognized from the day she'd arrived, one of the men who'd laughed at her on the platform. The other was younger, maybe 20, with blood streaming from his nose. "Somebody stop them," a woman called. "Let them work it out," someone else responded. Elias pushed through the crowd. "That's enough. Break it up." The men ignored him, still grappling. Elias grabbed the older one by the collar and hauled him back with surprising strength. Morrison grabbed the younger man. "I said enough," Elias repeated, his voice hard as iron. The older man, Clara heard someone call him Wade, spat blood and glared. "This doesn't concern you, Boone. You're brawling in the street like animals. That concerns everyone." "He insulted my sister," the younger man panted, straining against Morrison's grip. "Your sister's a—" Wade started, but Elias cut him off. "Don't. Whatever you're about to say, don't." Wade looked at Elias, at the crowd, at the twins standing with Clara, then he sneered. "Speaking of women of questionable virtue, I see you've still got your new whore living under your roof, Boone." The silence that followed was absolute. Clara felt the twins' hands tighten in hers, felt every eye in the street turn toward her, felt the weight of judgment, familiar and crushing. Elias's face went very still. "Take that back." "Why?" "Everyone's thinking it. Widow shows up on the bride train, nobody wants her, and suddenly she's living in your house, warming your bed? We all know what that arrangement really is." "You know nothing," Elias said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Miss Whitlock is caring for my household and my children, that's all." Wade laughed, ugly and mocking. "Right, because men take in strange women out of the goodness of their hearts. Tell yourself whatever helps you sleep at night, Boone." Elias moved so fast Clara barely saw it. One moment he was standing still, The next, his fist connected with Wade's jaw with a crack that made several people in the crowd gasp. Wade went down hard, hitting the mud with a wet thud. "Papa!" Rose cried out. Elias stood over Wade, his chest heaving. "You want to insult me, fine. You want to question my decisions, fine. But you don't talk about her. You don't talk about my daughters, and you sure as hell don't spread lies that could destroy a woman's reputation." Wade pushed himself up, spitting more blood. "Truth ain't lies. It is when you're making it up from whole cloth." Elias's hands were still fisted at his sides. "Clara Whitlock is a decent woman who needed a place and we needed help. That's the whole story. Anyone who says different is a liar." Clara felt something crack open in her chest. Surprise, gratitude, and a fierce protective anger all mixed together. She stepped forward, still holding the twins' hands. "Mr. Wade," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent street, "I understand small-mindedness. I was raised in a small town, married in one, widowed in one. I know exactly how people like you think and what you assume about women in difficult circumstances. But let me be very clear. My arrangement with Mr. Boone is exactly what he says it is. I keep his house, care for his children, and earn my keep through honest work. If that offends your delicate sensibilities, I suggest you examine why you find independence more threatening than destitution." "Independence?" Wade scoffed, wiping blood from his mouth. "That what they're calling it now? What would you have me do instead? Starve gracefully? Beg for charity? Marry the first man who'd have me regardless of character or compatibility? I chose work and dignity over any of those options. If that makes me scandalous in your eyes, I'll wear that scandal proudly." Several women in the crowd were watching Clara with expressions ranging from shock to something that might have been reluctant admiration. Mrs. Morrison, unsurprisingly, looked like she'd bitten into something sour. "Well said," Morrison called out. "Wade, get yourself cleaned up and go home. You're a disgrace." Wade climbed to his feet, unsteady. He looked at Elias, at Clara, at the watching crowd. "You'll all see. Mark my words, this situation's unnatural. It'll end badly." He stumbled off. The crowd began to disperse, people breaking into small groups to dissect what had just happened. Claire could hear the whispers starting already, spreading like wildfire. Elias turned to her. "I'm sorry. That shouldn't have happened." "You defended me." Clara was still processing this, still trying to understand why it felt so significant. "You didn't have to, but you did." "Of course I did. What he said was vile. Most men would have let it stand, to protect their own reputations." "I'm not most men." Elias looked at his daughters, who were staring up at him with wide eyes. "And those girls just watched me hit someone. That's not something I'm proud of." "He deserved it," Lily said firmly. "He said mean things about Clara," Rose added. "You were protecting her." "Violence isn't the answer," Elias said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Sometimes it is," Clara said quietly. "Sometimes words aren't enough." Morrison approached, looking troubled. "That was unfortunate. Wade's a hothead, but he's got friends in town. This might make things harder for you." Things were already hard. Elias took the supply sacks Morrison offered. "We'll manage." They loaded the wagon in silence. The twins climbed in back without being asked, their faces unusually somber. Clara sat beside Elias on the driver's seat this time, unwilling to hide in the back after what had just happened. As they drove out of town, Clara noticed the clouds had grown darker, more threatening. The wind was picking up, carrying the smell of rain and something else, something electric and dangerous. "Storm's coming," Elias said, snapping the reins to hurry the horses. "Big one by the look of it." "How big?" "Big enough to cause problems. We need to get home, secure everything, get the cattle in close." They made it back to the ranch in 30 minutes, driving faster than was probably safe. The sky had gone from bruised purple to an ominous green-gray that made Clara's stomach clench. She'd seen storms before, but nothing quite like this. The air itself felt wrong, charged and waiting. "Girls, inside!" Elias commanded as soon as they stopped. "Clara, can you—" "I'll handle them. You do what you need to do." He was already running toward the barn. Clara hustled the twins inside, her mind racing. Storm preparation. She'd done this in Cedar Falls, but this was different, more isolated, more exposed, more dangerous. "What do we do?" Rose asked, her voice small. "We make sure everything's secure, windows latched, doors barred, supplies gathered.
Then we waited out. Clara moved through the house methodically, checking every window, every possible entry point. Lily, fetch all the water containers and fill them. Rose, gather the lamps and make sure they're filled with oil. We might lose light.
The twins scrambled to obey. Outside, Clara could hear Elias shouting commands to himself, the sound of cattle lowing in distress, the barn door banging. The wind was really howling now, strong enough to rattle the windows. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Then close enough to shake the walls. "Clara!" Elias burst through the door, his face streaked with sweat and dirt. "Cattle are panicking. They're trying to break through the fence, scatter. I need to turn them back, get them into the near pasture where I can protect them. Go. We're secure here. If something happens, if the house is threatened, get the girls into the root cellar. It's behind the house. Entrance is... I'll find it. Go." He went. Clara finished securing the windows just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Within seconds, it was a deluge, sheets of water hammering the roof, the windows, turning the world outside into a gray blur. The twins huddled together at the table, their faces pale. Clara sat with them, one arm around each girl. "It's all right. Houses are built to withstand storms."
"Mama died in a storm like this," Lily whispered. "Not the weather, but there was a storm, and she got the fever, and everything went wrong." "This storm is just weather," Clara said firmly. "Just rain and wind. It can't hurt us in here." Lightning split the sky, close enough that the thunder came simultaneously. A crack so loud Rose screamed. The lamps flickered. "Where's Papa?" Rose asked, her voice shaking. "With the cattle, keeping them safe." "What if—"
"He knows what he's doing. He's been ranching in this country for years. He knows how to handle storms." But Clara's heart was pounding. She kept seeing Elias out there in that mess, trying to manage panicked animals in near-zero visibility. One wrong move, one spooked cow, and he could be trampled, injured, killed. The storm intensified. Rain hammered so hard Clara couldn't hear anything else. The wind screamed around the house like something alive and angry. One of the shutters tore loose with a bang that made all three of them jump. "I want Papa," Lily said, tears streaming down her face. "I know, sweetheart." "Me too." They waited. Minutes stretched like hours. Clara kept checking the windows, trying to see anything through the rain. Nothing, just gray chaos. Then finally, a figure emerged from the storm. Elias, stumbling toward the house, drenched to the bone. Clara had the door open before he reached the porch. "Are you—" "Fine. Cattle are secured. Lost part of the fence, but I got them into—" He stopped, swaying slightly. "I got them safe." He was shaking, whether from cold or exhaustion or leftover adrenaline, Clara couldn't tell. Probably all three. She grabbed a towel and shoved it at him. "Get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death." The twins swarmed him, hugging his legs despite his soaked state. "Papa, we were so scared." "I'm all right. Everyone's all right." But his voice was strained, and when Clara looked at him closely, she saw blood on his sleeve. "You're hurt." "Just a scrape. Cattle were wild with fear. One clipped me with her horn. It's nothing." "Let me see." "Clara, I'm fine. Let me see, or I'll have the twins hold you down while I examine it." That got a hint of a smile. He peeled off his wet shirt, revealing a gash on his upper arm that was definitely more than a scrape. Not deep enough to need stitching, but close. Clara cleaned it with water and the small amount of alcohol they kept for emergencies. Elias hissed, but didn't pull away. "You could have been killed," she said quietly. "Cattle are worth more than I am right now. Losing the herd would mean losing everything. Your daughters would disagree with your math." He looked at the twins, who were watching with worried faces. "I suppose they might." Clara bandaged the wound as best she could. "No more heroics tonight. The storm needs to pass before anyone goes out again." "Yes, ma'am." There was something in his voice, amusement, maybe, or gratitude, possibly both. They had a cold dinner because Clara didn't want to risk the fire in this wind. Bread and dried meat and water. Simple, unsatisfying, but safe. The twins ate mechanically, their eyes still wide with residual fear. "Tell us a story," Rose said suddenly. "Please, something to make us forget the storm." Elias and Clara exchanged glances. Then he said, "Your mother used to tell you the one about the bear and the rabbit, remember?" "Tell it again," Lily pleaded, the way she told it. For a moment Elias looked like he might refuse. His face went through several expressions: pain, reluctance, something that might have been fear. Then he took a breath. Once there was a rabbit who thought he was very clever, he began, his voice rusty but determined. And there was a bear who everyone thought was very stupid, but the rabbit wasn't as clever as he thought, and the bear wasn't as stupid as everyone believed. Clara listened to him tell the story, watched the twins gradually relax as familiar words washed over them. This was something their mother had given them, and Elias was honoring that gift by keeping it alive. The storm raged outside, but inside, in the warm kitchen, a small family was holding together. Around midnight, the wind shifted. The rain lessened. The worst of the storm moved past, leaving behind steady drizzle and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. "I need to check the damage," Elias said, standing. "In the dark? In the rain? The cattle? We'll survive until morning. You're exhausted, hurt, and barely standing. Sit down." He looked like he might argue. Then he sat. "I'll check everything at first light," he said. "If we lost more fence, if any animals scattered, if the barn took damage, we'll deal with it, all of it, together." He met her eyes. "You don't have to." "I know, but I'm going to anyway." The twins had fallen asleep at the table, heads pillowed on their arms. Elias looked at them with an expression that made Clara's chest ache. "They were terrified," he said quietly, "and I wasn't here. You were keeping them safe, keeping all of us safe. They know that." Rachel would have known what to say, how to comfort them. "I'm useless at—" He stopped, shook his head. "I'm just useless." "You're grieving. There's a difference." "Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks the same." Clara wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong. But she remembered her own grief after Samuel died, the way it had paralyzed her, made her doubt everything she'd once been capable of. So instead she said, "You kept going. That counts for something. You didn't give up, even when it would have been easier. There's no giving up when you have children depending on you." "Some men give up anyway. You didn't." He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "You really believe that?" "I do." Outside, the rain slowed to a whisper. The storm was ending. But something else, something fragile and new, was just beginning. Elias carried the twins to their loft one at a time, their small bodies limp with exhaustion. Clara watched him climb the ladder with each girl, his movements careful despite his own fatigue. When he came back down, his shirt was still damp, his hair plastered to his forehead, but something in his face had softened. "Thank you," he said, "for handling things, for being here. Where else would I be?" He almost smiled at that. "I suppose nowhere. Still, thank you." They stood in the quiet kitchen, the storm reduced now to gentle rain pattering against the roof. The lamps cast warm circles of light that didn't quite reach the corners. Outside, the world was dark and drowned and unknown. "You should sleep," Clara said. "Dawn will come early, and the damage assessment with it." "I should, but I'm too wound up." He poured himself water from the pitcher, drank it standing at the sink like he always did. "That fight in town, Wade, what he said about you. I've heard worse." "That doesn't make it right." "No, but it makes it survivable." Clara began banking the fire for the night, her movements automatic. "People like Wade, they need someone to look down on, makes them feel bigger. I learned not to care what small people think." "But it still hurts." It wasn't a question. Clara paused, considering whether to lie, then decided against it. "Yes, every single time. But pain doesn't mean you're wrong. Sometimes it just means you're alive." Elias set down his cup with careful precision. Rachel used to say something similar, that feeling things deeply was a strength, not a weakness, even when the feelings hurt. She sounds like she was wise. She was, about most things. He turned to face Clara fully. "Earlier, when Wade called you, when he said that about you, I wanted to kill him. Actually kill him. I've never felt that kind of rage before." Clara's hand stilled on the fire poker. "Why?" "Because he was wrong. And because those words, once they're out there, once people start believing them, they destroy women. I've seen it happen. A woman gets labeled, and suddenly she's fair game for every man who thinks she owes him something. I wasn't going to let that happen to you." Something in Clara's chest cracked open wider. "You barely know me. I know enough. I know you work harder than anyone I've ever met. I know my daughters trust you, which they haven't done with anyone since their mother died. I know you speak your mind even when it costs you. That's enough to know you don't deserve what Wade was implying. Clara blinked hard against the sudden burning in her eyes. Most men wouldn't see it that way. Then most men are cowards. He said it matter-of-factly, like it was simple truth. I should get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be brutal. He went to his room, closing the door quietly. Clara stood alone in the kitchen for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened, trying to understand why Elias defending her felt more significant than anything that had happened in the 3 years since Samuel died. She retreated to her own small room and lay down without undressing. Through the thin walls, she could hear the house settling, the rain still falling, the occasional creak of floorboards as someone shifted in sleep. Tomorrow would bring damage and problems and hard work. But tonight, something had changed. Some invisible line had been crossed. Clara fell asleep trying to decide if that terrified or comforted her. Morning came gray and wet. Clara woke to the sound of Elias already moving around, his boots heavy on the floorboards. She dressed quickly and emerged to find him at the table, bent over what looked like a hand-drawn map of the property. "Coffee's on," he said without looking up. Clara poured herself a cup and looked over his shoulder. The map showed the ranch boundaries, pasture divisions, where the fences ran. He'd marked several areas with X's. "These are the spots most likely to have damage," he explained. "The south fence was already weak. If the storm hit it hard, we'll have cattle scattered all over creation. The barn's east wall took a beating last winter, and I never properly repaired it. And the well house," he tapped another X. "If that took damage, we're in real trouble." "What do you need me to do?" He looked up at her then, surprise crossing his face. "You don't have to. I know, but I'm asking anyway. What do you need?" He studied her for a moment, then turned back to his map. "If you could keep the girls occupied and handle the house, that would help. I need to focus on the immediate emergencies without worrying about—" "Papa?" They both turned. The twins were descending the ladder, their faces still soft with sleep. Rose reached the bottom first, her eyes going immediately to Elias's bandaged arm. "You're hurt," she said, her voice small. "Just a scratch. I'm fine. You said that last time. And the time before." Lily's tone was accusatory. "You always say you're fine." "That's because I usually am. Mama said that too, right up until she wasn't." The words hung in the air like a slap. Elias's face went very still. Clara saw him struggling with what to say, how to respond to this impossible comparison. "Your mother was sick," he said finally. "What happened to her? That's not going to happen to me." "You don't know that," Rose whispered. "Bad things happen. We learned that." Clara moved to the stove, needing to do something with her hands. "Your father's right that he's not sick, but you're also right that we can't predict everything. That's why we take care of each other. Why we pay attention when someone's hurt, even if they say they're fine." "Exactly," Lily said, shooting her father a pointed look. Elias raised his hands in surrender. "All right. Message received. I'll be more careful." "Promise?" Rose demanded. "I promise to try. That's the best I can offer." The twins seemed to accept this conditional surrender. They helped Claire with breakfast while Elias finished studying his map. The meal was quiet, everyone lost in their own thoughts about what the day might bring. After eating, Elias stood and reached for his hat. "I'm heading out to assess. Could be gone most of the day depending on what I find." "Take food," Clara said, already wrapping cornbread and dried meat in cloth. "And water. You won't do anyone any good if you collapse from hunger." "Yes, ma'am." There was that hint of amusement again, subtle but there. He left. Clara and the twins watched through the window as he saddled his horse and rode toward the south pasture, his figure gradually disappearing into the gray morning. "He'll be all right," Clara said, more to herself than the girls. "Will he?" Lily asked. "Really?" "I believe so. Your father survived a lot. He knows this land." "But the storm was bad," Rose said. "Really bad. What if we spend this day worrying about things we can't control, or what if we spend it doing something useful?" Clara turned from the window. "Your lessons have been neglected. We could work on arithmetic, or I could teach you to make preserves from what's left in the pantry." "Both," the twins said simultaneously. They spent the morning at the kitchen table, working through simple math problems Clara created on the spot. The twins were quick learners, absorbing concepts faster than Clara had expected. Their mother had clearly given them a solid foundation. If Papa has 10 cattle and loses 3 in the storm, how many does he have left? Lily read from the problem Clara had written. 7, Rose answered immediately. But that's a sad problem. Mathematics doesn't care about feelings, Clara said. That's actually one of its better qualities. Mama said numbers were honest, Lily offered, that they couldn't lie to you like people could. Your mother was right about that too. By midday, they'd moved on to practical learning. Clara showed them how to make preserves from the last of the summer berries she'd found hidden in the back of the pantry, probably forgotten since before Rachel died. The twins worked with careful concentration, stirring the pot exactly as Clara directed. This was Mama's recipe, Rose said quietly, watching the berries break down into thick syrup. She made preserves every summer, jars and jars of them. Then we're honoring her memory by keeping the tradition alive. Will you teach us all her recipes? Lily asked. So we don't forget? Clara's throat tightened. If you know them, yes. If not, we'll create new ones together. Either way, you'll know how to feed yourselves and anyone else who needs feeding. They were just pouring the preserves into jars when they heard it, a sound that made Clara's blood run cold, cattle bellowing in panic, hooves thundering, and underneath it all, a high-pitched scream that could only be human. Clara ran to the window. Her heart stopped. Cattle were stampeding across the yard, at least a dozen of them, wild-eyed and terrified, running from something Clara couldn't see. And in their path, having apparently wandered out to explore after the storm, were the twins. No, not the twins who were standing right here with her. Clara's mind couldn't make sense of it for a split second. Then she understood. These were different children, slightly older, maybe 10 or 11. A boy and a girl who must have come from a neighboring ranch. They'd frozen in the face of the charging cattle, too terrified to move. Clara didn't think. She just ran. She hit the porch at full speed, vaulted the railing instead of taking the stairs, and sprinted toward the children. The cattle were seconds away. The children were screaming. Everything moved in sharp, crystalline clarity. Clara reached them just as the first cow thundered past. She grabbed both children and threw them toward the fence, putting her own body between them and the stampede. Pain exploded through her shoulder as something massive hit her, a glancing blow, but enough to spin her around and send her sprawling. She tasted dirt and blood, heard the twins screaming her name from the porch, felt hooves pounding the earth inches from her head. Then hands were grabbing her, dragging her. Elias's voice, raw and desperate. Move, damn it, move! He hauled her up and half carried, half dragged her to the fence. The children were already scrambling through, unhurt. The cattle thundered past, their panic gradually subsiding as they spread out across the yard. Clara collapsed against the fence, her shoulders screaming, her head spinning. Elias was in front of her, his hands on her face, checking for injuries. Are you insane, Walt? He demanded, his voice shaking. You could have been killed, trampled. What the hell were you thinking? The children, Clara managed. They were, I don't care. You don't throw yourself in front of stampeding cattle. You don't. He stopped, his hand still cradling her face. You don't risk your life like that. They would have died. So could you. But I didn't. Clara tried to smile and winced as pain shot through her jaw. I'm fine. You're not fine, you're bleeding. His fingers found the cut on her forehead, came away red. And your shoulder, can you move it? Clara tried. White-hot pain made her gasp. Maybe not well? Probably dislocated. His voice had gone flat, professional, the panic locked down behind control. We need to get you inside. Can you walk? I think so. He helped her up anyway, one arm around her waist supporting most of her weight. The world tilted alarmingly, and Clara realized she might have hit her head harder than she thought. The neighboring children's parents had appeared, the father gathering his kids, the mother rushing toward Clara with tears streaming down her face. You saved them, she sobbed. You saved my babies. I don't know how to. Thank you isn't enough. They're safe, Clara said, which was all that mattered. The twins met them at the porch, their faces white. Rose was crying silently, tears streaming down her cheeks. Lily looked like she might be sick. Is she going to die? Lily asked Elias, her voice breaking. Like Mama? Is Clara going to die? No. Elias said it with absolute certainty, though his hands were shaking where they gripped Clara. She's hurt, but she's not going to die.
I promise you that. He got Clara inside and into a chair. The neighboring family followed, the father apologizing profusely, the mother still crying, the children staring at Clara like she was some kind of miracle.
"We were checking our fence line," the father was saying. "Didn't know they'd wandered this far. I'm so sorry, Boone. If anything had happened..." But it didn't. Elias wasn't looking at him. His attention was entirely on Clara, his hands carefully probing her shoulder. "This is going to hurt. Brace yourself." He gripped her arm and shoulder. One sharp movement, a pop Clara felt more than heard, and a wave of pain so intense she nearly blacked out. When her vision cleared, the shoulder was back in place, the pain reduced from unbearable to merely awful. "Better?" Elias asked. "Define better." That got a ghost of a smile. "Still conscious and able to speak, I'll count it as a win." The neighbor's wife had produced bandages from somewhere and was helping clean the cut on Clara's forehead. The children hovered nearby, their faces full of guilt and awe. "You stepped in front of cattle for kids you don't even know," the boy said quietly. "Why?" Clara looked at him. "Because you needed help. That's reason enough. Our ma says you're the woman from the bride train, the one nobody wanted." "James!" his mother hissed. "It's all right," Clara said. "He's not wrong. I am that woman." "But you're a hero," the girl said. "You saved us." "I'm just someone who did what needed doing. There's a difference." The family left eventually, still thanking her, still apologizing, promising to bring food and supplies as repayment. Elias closed the door behind them and turned to face Clara. "Don't," she said before he could speak. "Don't tell me I was reckless or stupid or..." "I was going to say you're the bravest person I've ever met." That stopped her. "What?" "You're brave." He said it simply, like stating an obvious fact. "Foolish, yes. Reckless, absolutely. But brave. You saw children in danger and didn't hesitate. Didn't calculate the risk or worry about yourself. You just acted." "Anyone would have..." "No, they wouldn't. Most people freeze, or convince themselves it's not their problem, or decide the risk is too high." He pulled a chair over and sat facing her, close enough that their knees almost touched. "You threw yourself between stampeding cattle and two children who weren't even yours. That's not normal, that's exceptional." Clara felt heat rising in her face. "I didn't think about it. That's what makes it brave. You just did what was right." The twins had been quiet during this exchange, watching with wide eyes. Now Rose spoke up, her voice small and shaky. "We thought you were going to die, like Mama." "But I didn't. I'm right here." "What if you had?" Lily's face was streaked with tears. "What if you died trying to save those kids? What would we do?" Clara held out her good arm. Both twins rushed to her, careful of her injuries, and she pulled them close. "I'm sorry I scared you, but I couldn't let those children get hurt. Not when I could stop it." "Even if it meant you got hurt instead?" Rose asked against her shoulder. "Yes, even then. Some things are worth the risk." "Like what?" Lily demanded. "Like other people's lives. Like protecting those who can't protect themselves. Like doing the right thing even when it costs you." Elias was watching this exchange with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. Pain and pride and something else, something deeper. "Girls," he said quietly, "can you give us a minute?" The twins pulled away reluctantly. "You won't make her leave, will you?" Rose asked, sudden fear in her voice. "Because she got hurt?" "What? No. Why would you think that?" "Because everyone leaves eventually," Lily said. "Everyone we care about." Elias closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were bright with unshed tears. "Clara's not going anywhere, I promise you that." The twins looked between him and Clara, seeking reassurance. Clara nodded. "Your father's right. I'm staying." They went upstairs, but Clara could hear them moving around restlessly, not quite able to settle. Elias turned his full attention back to her. "Your shoulder needs to be immobilized for a few days, and you probably have a concussion, which means bed rest, whether you like it or not." "I don't have time for bed rest. There's work." "The work will wait. Your health won't." His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. "The girls need you, which means you need to recover properly." "They need me working, not lying around." "They need you alive."
He said it quietly, but with such intensity that Clara stopped arguing. Today scared them. It scared me. So you're going to rest and heal and let us take care of you for once instead of the other way around. Clara wanted to protest, but the pain in her shoulder was making her nauseous, and her head felt like it was full of cotton, and the adrenaline was wearing off, leaving nothing but exhaustion in its wake. All right, she said, but just for a day or two. We'll see. He stood and offered his good arm. Can you make it to your room? She could, barely, leaning heavily on him. He helped her lie down on the narrow bed, arranged pillows to support her injured shoulder, brought water and a cloth for her forehead. I need to get the cattle back under control, he said. But I'll check on you in a few hours. The girls will be here if you need anything. Elias. She caught at his hand before he could leave. Thank you for putting my shoulder back, for not being angry about... I am angry. I'm furious that you put yourself in danger, but I'm also... He paused, choosing words carefully. I'm grateful you were there, that you saved those children, that you're the kind of person who would, even if it terrifies me.
He left before she could respond. Clara lay in the semi-darkness of her small room and listened to the house around her. The twins' quiet voices from the loft. Elias's boots on the porch, then silence as he headed back to deal with the scattered cattle. She'd been here less than 2 weeks, but somehow, in that short time, this place had become more than just shelter. These people had become more than just her employers. When had that happened? When had she started caring about them beyond simple duty? Clara closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under. Tomorrow she'd worry about what it all meant. Today, she just needed to rest. She woke to darkness and the sound of quiet conversation. Disoriented, she tried to sit up and gasped as pain shot through her shoulder. Easy. Elias's voice close by. Don't move too fast. Clara's eyes adjusted. He was sitting in the chair beside her bed, barely visible in the lamplight from the doorway. Beyond him, she could see the twins hovering uncertainly. How long was I asleep? 5 hours. It's evening. I brought food if you can eat. Clara's stomach growled on cue. I can try. He helped her sit up, propping pillows behind her. The twins brought soup, thin and clearly hastily made, but hot and edible. Clara ate slowly, aware of 3 pairs of eyes watching her every movement. Stop looking at me like I'm about to expire, she said finally. I'm fine. You don't look fine, Lily said. You look like you fought a bear and lost. Felt more like a dozen bears, honestly. Rose didn't laugh at the attempt at humor. Those kids, the ones you saved, they came back with their parents, brought a whole ham and fresh bread and vegetables from their root cellar. That was kind of them. They said you're a hero, Lily added. Their ma cried again, said she'd never be able to repay you for giving her babies back. Clara shifted uncomfortably, and not just from her injuries. I did what anyone would do. That's not true. Elias's voice was quiet but firm. I've seen people watch others drown rather than risk themselves. I've seen men step over injured strangers rather than help. What you did, that's not common. It's rare. And it matters. The town will talk, Clara said. They'll find some way to make it my fault, or question my motives, or let them talk. Elias leaned forward, his face serious. You saved 2 children's lives today. Anyone who has a problem with that can answer to me. The twins were nodding vigorously. Rose said, Papa told the neighbors he'd fight anyone who spoke badly about you. He really said that. We heard him. You were supposed to be inside, Elias said, but without heat. We listened from the window, Lily admitted. You said Clara was the bravest woman in Red Hollow, and anyone who disagreed could take it up with your fists. Clara felt something warm spreading through her chest, fighting against the pain and exhaustion. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. He met her eyes. You've been defending yourself since you got here, fighting to prove you deserve the space you occupy. But you shouldn't have to fight alone. Not anymore. The twins were watching this exchange with expressions that Clara couldn't quite read. Hopeful, maybe. Or satisfied, like they'd known all along that something like this would happen. Thank you, Clara said quietly. Don't thank me. Just heal. Let us help you for once. He stood. Girls, time to let Clara rest. She needs sleep more than anything. They filed out reluctantly. At the door, Rose turned back. Clara, we're really glad you didn't die today. Me too, sweetheart. And we're glad you're here. With us. We don't want you to ever leave. Lily nodded emphatically. You're ours now, Papa said so. Elias's ears went red. That's not... I didn't mean... What I said was... But the twins were already climbing the ladder to their loft, leaving their father flustered and Clara trying not to smile despite the pain. I should explain, Elias started. They asked me earlier if you were staying permanently, and I said you were part of our household now, which they apparently interpreted as, it's all right. I understood what you meant. Did you? He looked at her intently. Because I'm not entirely sure I did. The air between them felt charged, full of things unsaid. Clara's heart was beating faster, and she didn't think it had anything to do with her injuries. Get some rest, Elias said finally, stepping back. I'll check on you in the morning. He left, closing the door softly. Clara lay in the darkness and wondered what exactly had changed today. Wondered if throwing herself in front of those cattle had altered something fundamental, or if it had simply revealed what was already there. She fell asleep with those questions unanswered, but with the warmth of Elias's words wrapped around her like a blanket. You're ours now. Maybe that was answer enough. Clara spent 3 days confined to bed rest, which felt like 3 years. Her shoulder healed slowly, the pain dulling from sharp to merely constant. The bruises bloomed spectacular colors, purple, green, yellow, a living map of where the cattle had hit her. But what bothered her most wasn't the physical pain. It was the helplessness of lying still while others worked. The twins brought her meals and sat with her for lessons, which they conducted propped on the end of her bed. Elias checked on her morning and evening, his hands gentle when he examined her shoulder, his face carefully neutral when she complained about being useless. You're healing, he said on the third evening. That's not useless. I should be working. There's so much to do. And it's getting done. The girls are helping more. I'm managing. The world hasn't ended because you took 3 days to recover from nearly being trampled to death. Don't be dramatic. I'm not. He sat in the chair beside her bed, looking tired but determined. You could have died, Clara. You understand that, right? Another few inches and that cow would have caught you full force. You'd be dead or crippled, and my daughters would have watched it happen. Clara looked away. But I'm not dead. I'm here. So can we stop dwelling on what might have happened? No, because you need to understand what you mean to them now. To us. He paused, choosing words carefully. The day you arrived, you were a stranger solving a problem. Now you're part of this family, whether you intended that or not. I'm the housekeeper. You're more than that and you know it. His voice was quiet but firm. The girls love you. They haven't loved anyone new since Rachel died, and He stopped, his jaw working. I've come to depend on you in ways I didn't expect. Clara's heart was beating too fast. Elias, I'm not asking for anything. I just need you to know that you matter, that what happens to you matters. So the next time you're deciding whether to throw yourself in front of livestock, maybe consider that there are people who need you alive. He left before she could respond. Clara lay in the darkness and felt the weight of his words settling over her like a blanket, heavy but not unwelcome. On the 4th day, she insisted on getting up. Her shoulder protested but held. She made it to the kitchen and found chaos. Dishes piled in the basin, flour spilled on the counter, the twins attempting to make breakfast with more enthusiasm than skill. What, Clara said from the doorway, is happening here? 3 guilty faces turned toward her. Lily had flour in her hair. Rose had what looked like egg on her sleeve. Elias had a smudge of ash on his cheek from trying to coax the temperamental stove to life. We were making breakfast, Rose said defensively. As a surprise. It's certainly surprising. We wanted to help, Lily added, since you've been sick. I wasn't sick. I was injured. There's a difference. Clara surveyed the damage. But I appreciate the effort. Now everyone step back and let me salvage whatever this is before we poison ourselves. She spent the next hour cleaning up the kitchen disaster and preparing proper food. Her shoulder ached, but the familiar work felt good, grounding. This was what she knew how to do. Take chaos and impose order. They ate together at the table, the food simple but edible. The twins chattered about the seeds that were starting to sprout in the garden. Elias mentioned that word had spread about Clara saving the neighbor children. and several families had sent over supplies as thanks: flour, sugar, coffee, even some fresh vegetables. "You're something of a local hero," he said, almost smiling. "Morrison came by yesterday. Said his wife actually shut her mouth for once when someone brought it up. Apparently even she couldn't find fault with saving children. Give her time, she'll find an angle. Probably. But for now, you've got the town's respect, whether you want it or not." Clara wasn't sure she did want it. Respect was fragile, easily lost. But she nodded and changed the subject to the fence repairs that still needed doing. The next Sunday, Elias announced they were going to town for church. Clara stared at him like he'd suggested they walk to the moon. "Church?" "Yes. The girls haven't been in months. It's time. I'm not welcome in that church. Half the congregation thinks I'm immoral. The half that matters knows better now. And the ones who don't, well, they can choke on it." Rose gasped. "Papa, that's not nice." "Neither is judging people without knowing them. Come on, get dressed. We're going." Clara had one decent dress, the black morning dress she'd arrived in, now cleaned and mended. She wore it with her chin up and her shoulders back, refusing to look ashamed of existing. The church was a simple wooden building at the edge of town. People were gathering outside, their Sunday clothes marking this day as different from the hard work of the week. Conversation stopped when Elias's wagon pulled up. Heads turned. Whispers started. Clara climbed down with as much dignity as her healing shoulder allowed. The twins flanked her like small guards. Elias took up position on her other side. They walked toward the church doors. The crowd parted. Some faces were friendly. The family whose children Clara had saved, Morrison looking approving, a few women Clara didn't know who nodded respectfully. But others were cold, judgmental. Mrs. Morrison's face could have curdled milk. At the door, Reverend Peters waited. He was older, gray-haired, with kind eyes that had seen too much suffering to be quick with condemnation.
"Elias, girls." He nodded to them, then turned to Clara. "And you must be Miss Whitlock. I've heard quite a bit about you." "I'm sure you have." "Mostly good things, actually. The Henderson family hasn't stopped talking about how you saved their children. That took tremendous courage. It took reaction time and luck. Call it what you will. In my book, it counts as courage." He stepped aside to let them enter. "You're all welcome here." They found a pew near the back. Clara could feel eyes on her throughout the service, burning into her spine like brands. The sermon was about charity and judgment. Whether Peters had chosen it specifically or by coincidence, Clara couldn't tell. But the message was clear enough. After the service, they were intercepted outside by Mrs. Henderson, who clutched Clara's hands and thanked her again with tears streaming down her face. Other families approached, some to thank her, some simply to introduce themselves properly, some to express quiet support for her presence in town. But then Mrs. Morrison pushed through the crowd, her face tight with righteous fury. "Reverend Peters," she said loudly, "I must protest. It's unseemly to welcome a woman of questionable morals into the house of the Lord. What message does that send to our children?" The crowd went silent. Clara felt the twins tense on either side of her, felt Elias's hand grip her elbow. "And what questionable morals would those be, Martha?" Peters asked mildly. "Everyone knows she's living in Elias Boone's house, unmarried, unchaperoned. The situation is scandalous. The situation is a widower with 2 young daughters receiving help managing his household. I fail to see the scandal. She's not family. She's not even a proper employee. She's just—" Mrs. Morrison struggled for words. "She's improper. She's brave." The voice came from the crowd, Mr. Henderson stepping forward. "She saved my children's lives. Put herself between them and a stampede without thinking twice. That's what she is." "That doesn't excuse the living arrangement," Mrs. Morrison insisted. "Then what do you suggest?" Clara heard herself say. Her voice was calm, almost pleasant, but there was steel underneath. Should Elias have left his daughters alone while he works the ranch? Should he have hired a man to cook and clean and care for them? Or should he have simply let them fend for themselves while the house fell apart and they grieved their mother? He should have remarried properly, not taken in some desperate woman from the bride train, some desperate woman who works every day to keep that household functioning, who teaches those girls their lessons and makes sure they're fed and cared for, who stepped in front of cattle to save your neighbor's children. Clara took a step forward. "You don't like me, Mrs. Morrison. That's fine.
You don't have to. But don't you dare question my character when you've never bothered to speak to me, to know me, to see anything beyond your own narrow assumptions. I never... Yes, you did. You judged me the moment you saw me, decided I was less than, simply because I came here alone and needed help. Well, here's the truth. I'm a widow who lost everything, who was thrown out by her own family for speaking up when she saw wrong being done. I came here because I had nowhere else to go. And I've worked harder than you've probably ever worked in your comfortable life to earn my place. So if that offends you, if my existence bothers you so much, then I suggest you examine why another woman's survival threatens you. The silence that followed was absolute. Mrs. Morrison's face had gone from red to white. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. Elias stepped forward, his voice carrying across the crowd. Clara Whitlock is under my protection and part of my household. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me. Anyone who speaks ill of her will answer to me. And anyone who thinks they can bully or shame her out of Red Hollow has another thing coming. Elias, Mrs. Morrison tried. I'm not finished. His voice was cold, harder than Clara had ever heard it. When my wife died, this town offered sympathy. But sympathy doesn't feed children. It doesn't fix fences or harvest crops or hold things together when everything's falling apart. Clara does all that and more. She's earned her place 10 times over. And if you can't see that, if you're so caught up in your own self-righteousness that you can't recognize decency when it's standing in front of you, then that's your failing, not hers. Rose stepped forward, her small voice cutting through the tension. Clara's going to be our new mama. We already decided. The crowd gasped. Elias went very still. Clara's heart stopped. Rose, Elias said carefully, we talked about this. That's not... But we want her to be, Lily interrupted, moving to stand with her sister. We love her. She takes care of us and teaches us and makes everything better. That's what mamas do. Girls, Elias tried again. Don't you want her to stay forever? Rose asked, looking up at her father with those serious, seeing eyes. Don't you love her too? The question hung in the air like something physical. Every person in that crowd was staring at Elias, waiting for his answer. Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only stand there while her entire future balanced on whatever he said next. Elias looked at his daughters, then at Clara. His face went through several expressions: panic, resignation, and finally something that might have been relief. Yes, he said quietly, then louder, yes, I do. The crowd erupted in whispers. Clara felt the world tilt sideways. The twins were grinning like they'd just won something important. Mrs. Morrison looked like she might faint. Elias crossed the space between them in 3 strides. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to come out like this. I had a plan, but they're right. The girls are right. He stopped, took a breath. I love you. I don't know when it happened exactly. Maybe when you fought me over banking the fire properly. Maybe when you made the girls laugh for the first time in months. Maybe when you threw yourself in front of cattle without hesitation. But somewhere along the way, you stopped being the woman who needed a place and became the woman I can't imagine living without. Clara's eyes were burning. Elias, I'm not asking you to love me back. I know that might take time, if it ever happens at all. But I'm asking you to stay. To be part of this family officially. To marry me, if you're willing. Not out of obligation or necessity, but because... His voice cracked. Because we need you. Because you make us better. Because you're already home. The crowd was completely silent now, watching, waiting. Even Mrs. Morrison had stopped sputtering. Clara looked at this man who'd defended her, protected her, seen her worth when the world said she had none. Looked at these 2 girls who'd chosen her first, before anyone else, when she'd been at her lowest. Looked at the life she'd built here, hard work and small victories and the slow accumulation of belonging. Yes, she said. Yes, Elias repeated, like he couldn't quite believe it. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll stay. Yes to all of it. Clara felt tears streaming down her face and didn't care. I didn't come here looking for love. I came here because I had nowhere else to go. But somewhere along the way, you became home. You and these girls and this impossible life. So yes, absolutely yes. The twins screamed with joy and threw themselves at both adults. Elias pulled Clara into his arms, careful of her healing shoulder, and held her like she was something precious. The crowd erupted in applause. Even some of the skeptical faces had softened into smiles. Mrs. Morrison turned on her heel and marched away, her husband trailing apologetically behind her. But Clara barely noticed. She was too busy being held by Elias, surrounded by the twins, feeling the weight of judgment lift and replace itself with something she'd almost forgotten existed. Acceptance. Belonging. Home. Reverend Peters cleared his throat. Well, I suppose that settles the question of propriety. I can perform the ceremony next Sunday if you'd like. Make everything official. We'd like that, Elias said, still holding Clara. Very much. The crowd gradually dispersed, people congratulating them, offering help with preparations, already planning how to spread this new gossip, the good kind for once. The Hendersons promised to host a reception. Morrison said he'd extend extra credit for whatever they needed. Even some of the previously hostile faces had thawed into cautious approval. On the ride home, the twins chattered excitedly about the wedding, about what Clara would wear, about whether they could have cake. Elias drove in silence, but his hand found Clara's and held tight. I meant it, he said quietly, under the twins' excited conversation. About loving you. This isn't just about making things proper or giving the girls a mother. This is your... He struggled for words. You're everything I didn't know I needed. I love you too, Clara said, and realized as she said it that it was true. Somewhere between the dirty dishes and the hard work and the 1,000 small moments of shared life, she'd fallen in love with this complicated, grieving, stubborn man. I don't know when it happened, but I do. His hand tightened on hers. Rachel would have liked you. She would have wanted this, wanted the girls to have someone who sees them, who fights for them the way you do. I hope so. I know so. He glanced at her. This doesn't erase her. You understand that? She'll always be their first mother, the one they remember. I know, and I don't want to replace her. I just want to be here for them, for all of you, whatever that looks like. It looks like family, Elias said simply. That's what it looks like. The week before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation. The house was clean top to bottom. The twins helped Clara alter her one good dress, adding touches of lace from Rachel's things, offered by Elias with quiet ceremony, a blessing from one wife to another. The garden's first vegetables were ready for harvest, small but real, proof that even late-planted seeds could grow if tended properly. The neighboring families brought food and supplies. Morrison provided what little they needed on extended credit that everyone knew he'd probably forgive. Even some of the women who'd been coldest at church softened enough to offer help and advice. Mrs. Morrison, predictably, was absent from all preparations. She'll come around, Morrison said apologetically when he delivered supplies. Or she won't. Either way, don't let her diminish this. I won't, Clara promised. The night before the wedding, Clara sat with the twins on the porch, watching the sun set over the prairie. The sky was on fire, orange and pink and purple bleeding together in ways that shouldn't have worked but did. Are you nervous? Rose asked. A little. Are you? About what? About me officially becoming your mother. About things changing. The twins exchanged one of their wordless communications. Then Lily spoke. Things already changed. When you came, when you stayed, when you made everything better. Tomorrow just makes it official. We loved you before Papa said he did, Rose added. We knew first. You did, Clara agreed. You chose me when nobody else would. You know that changed my life, right? You saved me just as much as I saved those other children. Really? Lily looked surprised. Really? I was lost. I didn't know where I belonged anymore. And you two looked at me and decided I belonged here. With you. That gift, Clara's voice caught. That gift is bigger than anything I can ever repay. You don't have to repay it, Rose said matter-of-factly. That's what family does. We choose each other. Such wisdom from such young souls. Clara pulled both girls close and watched the sun finish setting over land that was slowly becoming hers. Elias found them there, half an hour later. He sat on the porch step, his back against the post, and let the peace of the evening settle over all of them. Big day tomorrow, he said finally. Second biggest, Clara corrected. The biggest was when your daughters chose me out of a crowd. He smiled at that. They've got good instincts. They got it from their father. And their mother, both of them. He said it deliberately, including Rachel in this moment, honoring what had come before while accepting what was coming next. The twins eventually went inside, tired from the week's excitement. Elias and Clara stayed on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Having second thoughts?" Elias asked. "No. You?" "No." He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I was just thinking about how strange life is, how the worst things can lead to the best things if you're willing to keep moving forward." "You mean like being thrown out by your family and ending up at a disaster of a ranch in the middle of nowhere?" "Something like that. Or losing your wife and thinking you'll never feel anything again, then finding someone who makes you remember how to live." Clara leaned against his shoulder, careful of her healing injuries. "We're both pretty broken, you know. This isn't going to be easy. Nothing worth having is easy, but we're good at hard work. We've proven that." "We have." Clara tilted her head to look up at the stars. "You know what the hardest part is going to be?" "What?" "Letting ourselves be happy. We've both gotten so used to grief and survival that actually being content might feel foreign." Elias considered this. "Then we'll learn together. We've learned everything else, how to share space, how to work as a team, how to care for the girls. We can learn happiness too." "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple, but it's possible. That's enough." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, watching the night deepen. Tomorrow would bring ceremony and celebration and the official joining of lives that had already intertwined. But tonight was just them, two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their previous lives and decided to build something new. The wedding was simple. Reverend Peters performed the ceremony in the church, with what felt like half of Red Hollow in attendance. Clara wore her altered black dress, now decorated with Rachel's lace and a ribbon the twins had insisted on adding. Elias wore his one good suit, pressed carefully the night before. The twins stood beside them as Clara and Elias spoke their vows. Short, honest promises to support each other, to work together, to build a life worth living. Nothing flowery or elaborate, just truth. When Peters declared them married, Elias kissed Clara carefully, mindfully, like he was sealing a promise that mattered more than anything. The twins cheered, the congregation applauded. Even Morrison's wife managed a tight smile that might have been approval or indigestion. The reception at the Henderson house was loud and crowded and full of people Clara was still learning to know. They brought food and gifts and stories, folding her into the community whether she'd planned on belonging or not. Late in the afternoon, Morrison pulled Clara aside. "My wife wanted me to tell you something," he said quietly. "Let me guess. She thinks I'm a harlot who trapped a good man?" "Actually, no." Morrison looked uncomfortable. "She said, and these are her words, not mine, she said you remind her of herself when she was young, before she learned to be scared of what people thought. She said watching you stand up to her made her remember who she used to be." Clara stared at him. "She said that?" "In her way, yes. She won't apologize. That's not how Martha works. But she wanted you to know." He paused. "She also sent a wedding gift. New linens, good ones." Thank you. Tell her thank you." "Tell her yourself. She'll be around, probably still irritating but less hostile. That's progress for Martha." As evening fell, the Boone family, now officially including Clara, made their way home. The twins fell asleep in the back of the wagon, exhausted from excitement. Elias drove with one hand, the other holding Clara's. "So," he said, "Mrs. Boone, how does it feel? Strange. Good strange. Like putting on clothes that fit properly after wearing things too tight for years." "That's specific. I'm a specific person." She leaned against his shoulder. "Are we going to be all right? Really all right?" "I don't know," Elias said honestly. "I can't promise easy or perfect. The ranch is still struggling, money's still tight. The town will still gossip. Life is hard out here." "That's not reassuring." "But," he continued, "I can promise that we'll face it together, that you won't be alone, that whatever comes, we'll handle it as a family. Is that enough?" Clara thought about everything that had brought her here. The rejection, the humiliation, the desperate journey west, the moment those two small girls had chosen her, the slow building of trust and partnership and finally love. None of it had been easy.
None of it had been perfect, but it had been real. And it had led here, to this wagon, this man, these children, this life that was messy and complicated and absolutely worth fighting for. "Yes," she said, "that's enough. That's more than enough." They reached the ranch as full darkness fell. Elias carried the sleeping twins inside while Clara lit the lamps. The house glowed warm in the prairie night, no longer falling apart, no longer neglected but cared for, tended, loved. Clara stood in the kitchen that she'd scrubbed clean that first week, looking at the table where they'd shared awkward meals that had slowly become comfortable, at the stove she'd learned to coax into behaving, at the windows that now let in light instead of filtering it through years of dirt. This house had been a desperate last resort. Now it was home. Elias came back down from settling the twins. He stopped in the doorway, watching Clara survey the kitchen. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I was wrong." "About what?" "About being unwanted. About being too much. About not having value." She turned to face him. "Cedar Falls was wrong. The people who threw me out were wrong. I wasn't too much. I was exactly enough for the people who needed me. I just had to find them first." Elias crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. "We needed you. We still need you. And not because you work hard or keep house or care for the girls. Though you do all those things beautifully. We need you because you're you. Because you see what needs doing and do it. Because you speak truth even when it's uncomfortable. Because you love fiercely and protect absolutely and refuse to give up. You're making me sound better than I am. I'm describing exactly who you are. Who you've always been. You just needed someone to see it." Clara buried her face in his chest, feeling tears she'd been holding back all day finally break free. Not sad tears, the other kind. The overwhelming kind that came from being seen, being valued, being chosen. "Thank you," she whispered, "for defending me, for loving me, for letting me stay. Thank you for saving us, all of us. We were drowning before you came. You threw us a rope and pulled us back to shore." They stood in the warm kitchen, holding each other, while outside the prairie wind sang its endless song. The land was still harsh. Life was still hard. Tomorrow would bring work and struggle and all the challenges of building a life from damaged pieces. But they would face it together, as a family. As people who'd learned that sometimes the worst moments led to the best destinations, if you were brave enough to keep walking. Clara Whitlock had been thrown away by everyone who was supposed to care for her. But she hadn't stayed thrown away. She'd picked herself up, traveled to the edge of civilization, and built something worth having from absolute nothing. She'd been told she was too much, too difficult, too outspoken, too inconvenient. Turns out she'd been exactly right for a family that needed someone strong enough to hold them together when everything was falling apart. Worth, Clara had learned, wasn't something given by others. It was something proven through action, through choice, through the daily decision to show up and keep trying even when everything felt impossible. She'd been unwanted. Now she was essential. She'd been rejected. Now she was chosen. She'd been cast out. Now she was home. And in the unforgiving frontier, in this house she'd helped save, with this man she'd grown to love and these children who'd claimed her first, Clara finally understood the truth she'd been searching for since the day they'd driven her out of Cedar Falls. She wasn't too much. She had never been too much. She was exactly enough. And for the first time in 3 years, that was all she needed to be.